Just a few days back, I read a headline which said, knocked down by the virus, flattened by the winds. Now, this news, plus the news of swarms of locusts and so much more, made me think that perhaps many more people like me have started thinking about the environment much more. And which is perhaps, like any marketing body would say, this is the first step for any action, that is awareness. And keeping in mind that today is World Environment Day, International Environment Day, we at Yogi Books thought that it would be best if we could speak to a subject matter specialist, and who better than Kanchikoli, Ms. Kanchikoli. Now, having published books on flora and fauna, books like The Great Himalayan Park, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and several eco-fiction, we believe today environment is more important, not just for aesthetics and our health, but several other things. And today we'll be talking about urban biodiversity and its impact on our everyday life. And for people who don't know Ms. Kanchikoli yet, here is a brief introduction. I'm sure you will read up much more about her work and take her enthusiasm, take her work forward and support in this cause of environmental protection. Ms. Kanchikoli is a researcher, writer, and a campaigner on environment, forest, and biodiversity governance in India, and their interface with the legal and policy processes. Her work emphasized the need for both research and advocacy as essential to highlight aspects of regulatory designs and how its influences ultimate outcomes related to livelihood and ecological security. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, I will start with the first question. Why is it important to talk about environment in today's health emergency?
So, I think there are many reasons. It's always a good time to talk about environment, but more particularly during the health emergency, because I think this particular phase has proven more than any time before, and has proven mostly to general public the importance of environmental health, the importance of public health, and the importance of individual health. All of it is, and all of that being so deeply interrelated. And we are where we are right now with our increased vulnerability because of certain choices that we've made in the past. And these choices have meant, whether we create the environment around us much more polluting, whether it's also the food that we eat, that has made our individual immunity a problem, and how the human footprint has spread so much, and that we've not really let too much space around us to be able to heal around us. So the way we work from the point of view of just understanding the environment around you, that the moment our footprint on the environment reduced, you saw much more around you emerge, whether it is the clean water, the air. You had birds right there in your, whether they were plants or not, birds were coming in, butterflies that have not been visible for the longest were getting visible. So that is what we see immediately around us. But we also realize that there are parts of the country where the environment has become so toxic that even during this pandemic time, any economic activity without regulatory oversight, without pollution monitoring, has created much more havoc. So we are technically equally dealing with the health emergency, but the safeguards and the infrastructure that is available to many privileged people is simply not available to the others. And I think this is a very important opportunity for us to recognize that environment and public health, environment and health in general are very, very deeply integrated, and much more needs to be done bringing these two streams together.
Okay, next question is, I have heard, I just got to know that the UN Climate Summit, which is also known as COP26, has been cancelled for this year. And so what is the impact of that? Because during the lockdown, because now we can't talk at a global level, at a very big level, we can't talk about environment. But we are doing these small events and everything. Will that have an impact on any of our activities or our lives at a policy level?
No, I think the climate negotiators definitely will be using video conferencing to have their conversations. I think whether it's countries meeting physically face to face and committing to addressing climate issues, or it is done through a virtual interface. In fact, what is what is more important for us to actually relook and revisit all the commitments made so far since the 80s. Countries, I think the evidence and the verdict is out there that there is a climate crisis, there is an environmental crisis, and it's been there for a while. It's just that during the negotiations, there have been discussions about who is more responsible, who needs to take more action. Will it actually affect your GDP? Will it actually affect economic growth if you make certain choices? But in a situation like this, I think there is so much to already rely on, to build on, and make very, very concrete choices. Because this is the first time we've actually been in I think first time in history that you can remember, that you've been in a situation where you've been forced into a 2-month time period where you can see the world operate very differently. And of course, we've had to pay a very, very high human cost for it. And that cost is going to last for a very long time, both humanitarian as well as economic cost for it. But it also, this is a very good, important opportunity, whether it's for climate negotiators or for individual countries, to really deeply understand and figure out, this is our moment to really restructure things. This is actually the framing of we need to go back to normal is actually that new normal has to be. This is our opportunity to really redefine that new normal. It's not if you just jump up and go to business as usual. A, the pandemic doesn't really allow for it. B, the real serious problems of our footprint on the environment, as well as the economy, how it's structured, has both thrown up questions for both climate negotiators as well as domestic governments.
Okay. So coming to the next question, we often talk about natural biodiversity and urban biodiversity as if they are two different things. Surely there is a holistic relationship between the two. Could you please elaborate on that?
So I think one is a question of geography, urban, rural, peri-urban, it's basically where biological diversity is located. It's very area-based, or it's ecosystem and habitat-based. The other is about ecology. It's about areas which are coastal, or which are forest, or it's about it's a different sorts of ecosystems that you would find there. It would be about this is uninhabited natural, what is spoken like that, but there's also lived ecology. It's about human beings having carefully created those spaces. So I think if you see these spaces, I mean, every discipline, every study, every individual probably approaches these places differently. Urban, rural, coastal, forest, natural, lived. But in nature, these are contiguous. So you start at one place and you move to another place. Land and sea is interconnected. Rivers and forests are interconnected. Cities and hinterlands are interconnected. So I think that interconnectedness is what we really need to see, both in terms of how we understand nature as well as how we exploit nature. Because the action of one part of of the geography has a very significant impact on another part of the geography.
Yeah, the butterfly effect, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So just a year back, we published a book on the Baulis of Delhi. Now, these are historical pieces and lesser known peers of our heritage. But the fact that we realized while doing this book is that water was becoming a scarcity in our city. Let's not go even to the country, in Delhi itself.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of hue and cry about it, and suddenly we have stopped talking about it. So apart from water bodies, parks, open spaces, fringe forests, these are the obvious components of our biodiversity. But as an expert, what are the other elements that you would like to include or are included, particularly in fauna?
So one of my most earliest learnings about biodiversity was split word. Bio means life, diversity it's its variety. So it's almost like everything around you is biodiversity. So it's like textbook learning about it. And but if you apply it to everything around you, everything from food that you eat to the plants around you, to the birds, the butterflies, the trees. So each individual. So at a species level, you understand flora, fauna, species. If you see it at habitat level or at a space level. So parks, wetlands, marshes, just areas with tree canopy, grasses, all of it actually is with biodiversity. So in Delhi, for instance, the Najafgarh wetland is biodiversity. The park next to my house is biodiversity. The vegetable market is biodiversity. When we cut a tree, we look at only the trunk, but everything that lives on that tree, whether it's the flowers, the fruits, or the birds, the nests, it's the insects, all of it is biodiversity. So in fact, it's so vast that we as human beings are such a small component of it, and yet we try and overpower it all the time. In fact, the question that you mentioned about the Baulis, these were systems that human civilizations had actually set up to be able to use technology to be able to conserve and utilize natural resources. But if that technology becomes such that you overpower nature and you overexploit nature, then the interconnectedness somewhere breaks. And that's exactly what you see around a time like this, that's why we deal with issues of air pollution, extreme heat in cities because of the building material that. So it's actually, there are so many, the word biodiversity can bring in so much within its grammar that if you visualize, I mean, all the conversations about organic food, about millets, about all that has become elite products right now, the medicinal qualities of haldi, all of that is actually a conversation of biodiversity.
Okay, so tell me something about these huge glass buildings that we see, essentially air conditioned buildings that we see in the industrial, the office houses, office places. Somehow I feel that's not very suitable to the climate or the weather we are in right now. There's over dependence on appliances and things like that. But then just a couple of months back, much before the lockdown, I went to I think a years back, I went to a campus in Neemrana, which actually uses a lot of how do you say, green architecture in their lives. Do you think there is a higher scope for green architecture in our country, and how can we develop it further? Not just architects, but normal people like us.
See, I think it's how you view space. Now, if I view a park or a forest, and I feel that anything I need to do in that space would require cutting it down fully, raising it to the ground, and building something completely new over. Rather than viewing that space as something that even if I am building over it, I have to integrate that landscape in my design. So, most of these glass buildings that you see, or what is happening in the redevelopment of cities like Delhi, all of that, you actually envision that space as an empty space. The moment you envision that space as an empty space, whether or not it's empty, you have to empty it out. So you cut all the trees, you level it, you dig, you do all that, and then you put up another building saying that this uses energy efficient technology, this uses water efficient technology, all of those kind of things. We are recycling all that. Notwithstanding the importance of all that, if you integrate that with how you envision that space and build accordingly. So your question about building, how should architecture, or how should building technology really visualize some of those things. So, for instance, a lot of these buildings are being made for basement parking. So you're actually making enough, you have to dig down and cut all the trees and level the whole thing, because you make space for cars. You're not making space for houses. So I think it's so deeply linked with how we've created our world that you're responding to something else. You're not responding to ecological living, or you're not responding to responsible living, really, in this situation. And actually, what really gets missed is the impact of land use change, because everything that you level off, you have changed the existing function of that place. All the water regeneration qualities, all the biodiversity that's dependent on that, all that goes. Then it's space for that building, the inhabitants of that building, and the cars which are equal inhabitants of that building.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, my college, I'm from JMC, and it's built on a sort of a ridge. My common room was both sides. They were just the mountains, or sort of, I don't know what is it called. It's just that the ridge was there. So my college was actually built on that. So I felt very proud about it for not raising it to the ground. But what happened? The nearby area is completely all embassy area. There was so much construction and everything going on that our area came to suffer because of that. But there was also one thing, because when I used to be a lot of birds, and now I can't see those birds. So the most important bird that I didn't see were most common ones were the domestic sparrows. Do you think the eradication, the loss of these birds is affecting our urban life? And what is its impact on us?
So I think, see, the disappearance of the sparrow is very symptomatic of how human beings have built the space around them. So we've actually destroyed habitat, which would be breeding grounds of birds, etc. But a house sparrow was also so much about not only living in natural spaces; it was also they were in homes. So in fact, there is a lot written and research over the disappearing of the house sparrow. But even commonsensically, if you understand it, it's the products that we start using around it. It's how our buildings are designed, where the light comes in. Is there space for nests? The moment there are nests, you want to destroy it. So I'm repeating myself that we've destroyed habitats. We've actually started using products that are not very amenable to birds, bees, butterflies, all of that. So it kind of impacts that. So you don't see sparrows around that. See, are the way we structured our houses, and we would like to connect with the natural world. There is no space for that. The new houses, where would the sparrows really come in and build their little nest? In an attic or something like that. Those structures don't exist anymore. So if you don't have space for it, obviously that interconnectedness is broken. I know lots of friends who actually create homes where they're actually inviting the birds in, including the sparrow. So you have to create the space to be able to invite nature in rather than close up. Here we are so worried about any germ or microorganism coming into our house that you're sanitizing it so much that that your connection with nature is completely gone. I mean, if Gulmohar falling during during the summer is a hindrance to a lot of people. If you have these big trees where Palash and Gulmohar and all, they all fall and oh no, this is slippery. The bulbs will slip. We'll slip over it. It's dirty. It's all that. It's how you envision. So I do understand that it's a risk for people who are specially abled or who have difficulty navigating that space, including those who are older. But it's how we visualize that space. Oh my God, this is I want to. That all that needs to be cleaned out because that's the space for me and the way I want to live, and not necessarily all the other species around.
So you were talking about creating. You mentioned the word creating. So keeping that in mind, preservation of urban biodiversity is often believed to be a clash with development programs. How is this issue best resolved? Can we discuss a few concrete examples? I also feel the word sustainable development, how is it perceived and how it should be perceived?
So I think you take, for instance, I'll let me speak through some of the foremost citizens campaigns in urban India today. So one of the citizens campaigns is the Delhi Trees SOS. The Delhi Trees SOS basically talks about massive felling of trees for infrastructure and redevelopment projects in Delhi. What the Delhi Trees SOS is saying is that you don't, the members basically came together and said, we are not saying that you don't build government offices. We are saying you build it in a way that the trees are protected. So you don't, that the example that so a lot of the colonies that we talk about, Sarojini Nagar, Netaji Nagar, these were all government colonies and the government wants to revamp it. But what is coming up there is massive commercial structures, which along with the government housing. So the two questions that came up. Why should 16,500 or later on 14,000 trees be felled to really rebuild that entire area? Can the building not be inclusive? If you want to double up the accommodation, why do you need to also have large World Trade Centers and shopping malls and all those kind of things? So that was the citizen campaign that was talking about, and that I'm particularly pointing out is because these colonies, the urban biodiversity of these colonies, whether it's all the trees that were planted by the residents, all the bird life, all the avenues that were created, the open how you could go in and out of those spaces freely. This was all created by our interaction with those spaces. So it was not like far off jungles. So if you have to actually keep that intact, one of the questions were being asked was, why don't we just redesign it in a way to be able to keep in mind that we are water stressed, we are dealing with air pollution, and also this is our space. We as a civilization have created it. Why don't we actually protect it and respect that? The other such campaigns is about say the RA forest in Mumbai, where it's a peri-urban area where they're talking about a metro shed and it's last living habitat space which needs to be protected. So I think a lot of urban footprint urban life footprint is now extending beyond the immediate urban. I think historians and other people have also said this has always happened. It's not like Delhi was built overnight and it always looked like this. We have gradually built over Delhi. Our three Vasant Kunj malls are over the ridge, so we have actually taken over the space. But I think in the light of the evidence of acute air quality problems, high level of degradation of the climate, all the impacts that we've seen with earthquakes, floods, cyclones, to revisit all those assumptions that we can take over space and redevelop it without keeping the existing ecosystem in mind. And also I think revisit some of the assumptions about the necessity of all of that. Do you need another World Trade Center in the middle of Delhi? Do you need? Can there be an alternate use of or alternate route for a metro? All those kind of. Do you need a fast-paced coastal road or not? I think all those things have to be revisited, and only then we'll be able to really plan for. I think an urban development or a rural economy policy that is built that actually center.
Thank you very much for those insightful words and your time and for talking to us. I'm sure everyone who's watching this will take out some time for introspection and see what can be done best by themselves and spare all of us, each one of us, from eco-anxiety. Thank you very much. I hope to see you all good.